My name is Connie Brown Collins of Voter Rights Network of Wyandotte County. I'd like to welcome everyone to our Elected versus Appointed Kansas Supreme Court Justices program. As we get started, I'd like to thank you all for coming out today, because I know Saturdays are hard. There's always a ton for everybody to do. So thank you for caring about what goes on with our elections and how it impacts our lives. And for wanting to learn all about the impacts on our communities. I hope everybody got a chance to get some lunch. Feel free to go over and get some if you didn't. We will not have a break, I'm so sorry. So we'll be kind of eating and working at the same time. We also had some time constraints when ordering catering, so hopefully it worked out. I don't see any elected officials. Do we have any candidates or elected officials? I don't see any. Okay. I would like to start out by thanking and acknowledging the hosts of this forum, our organization, of course, Voter Rights Network of Wyandotte County, also AIR. AIR is Advocates for Immigrant Rights and Reconciliation, the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, and also Centro. I'll tell you just a little bit about each of our hosting organizations. So Voter Rights Network of Wyandotte County's main purpose is to give voice to Wyandotte County and Johnson County communities that may feel underrepresented in legislative and government policy making. As a relatively young organization compared to our other hosts, we got started during the last redistricting cycle, in which we fought hard against the gerrymandered maps that ultimately divided our congressional and overloading districts. We haven't stopped fighting though, and we continue to inspire action through education, information, and advocacy, and to provide education and tools to help individuals and communities form and contribute perspectives on voter rights, human rights, and fundamental rights. Our co-host, AIR, again, Advocates for Immigrant Rights and Reconciliation, organizes and activates immigrants in Kansas and Missouri to advocate for their rights and well-being, providing them with the tools they need to better protect themselves and their families. It achieves this through education, leadership development, and community-driven action. AIR strives for a future where immigrant rights are respected and upheld, working alongside communities to create lasting change. The League of Women Voters of Johnson County serves the Johnson and Wyandotte counties in Kansas that are located in the greater Kansas City metro area. The League is a community-based 501c3 organization that has fought since 1920 to improve government and engage all citizens in the decisions that impact our lives. The League is nonpartisan, which means it neither supports nor opposes candidates or parties. The Johnson County League was instrumental in providing text banking outreach for this event. Centro was founded in 1976, and one thing that has stayed constant over those 50 years is its commitment to the people of Wyandotte and Johnson counties, particularly the growing Hispanic population. It believes all individuals, regardless of language, place of birth, or documentation status, deserve to be fully accepted and integrated into the communities in which they live, work, and pursue their dreams. Centro strengthens communities and provides and improves lives of Latinos and others through educational, social, and economic opportunities. Those are our hosts for today. At this point, I would like to go over a few items that may guide our session. First, I have to stress that we are committed to nonpartisanship in our interactions today. Many of us have 501c3 organizations and partners, and we risk our nonprofit status if we are partisan in our discourse today. Please show respect in this area. We will not be able to entertain questions from the audience that are determined to be partisan. We have a lot to cover in a short time frame, so we will stick to pretty strict time allotments for our speakers so that we can move through the program and give each speaker an opportunity to make comments. We're asking people in the audience to write their questions down on note cards. You should have those note cards on your table if you don't, and pencils. If you don't have them, there are more over at the registration table. We may not have time to get to every question, but we will do our best. Our friends, we have some friends that will collect our note cards. Do we have our friends that will collect note cards? Raise your hands. Raise your hand. In the back, okay. Debbie and Marie, okay. Cool. Thank you. When you ask a question and write it on your note card, hold your note card in the air, and one of our friends will collect it, bring it up to us, and we will give it to the moderator. We also have some questions that are submitted by students that will be asked today. These students are from the JANA Club. It's a workforce development organization that prepares students for careers in broadcasting, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. They are from Wyandotte County Public Schools. Since we are live streaming and recording this program, we'd appreciate you not talking during these discussions. We'll be happy to send out a copy of this program afterward to those who would like one, and we'll email out the YouTube link to folks on our list. As you know, this is a community education event. We're asking everyone to respect each other no matter what viewpoints are shared. Finally, I also ask that we work to treat everyone with dignity, honor, and respect. Just a few housekeeping things. Feel free to refresh your refreshments. Also, the men's and women's restrooms are out those back doors and across the hall. Feel free to come and go as the need arises. Again, we won't have a break, but if you need to stretch your legs before we finish, please do so. I also want to acknowledge and thank some of the organizational sponsors and partners who helped make this event possible. Of course, our organization, Voter Rights Network of Wyandotte County, and its board of directors, Ed Equity, that has a table over there. Formerly, they were Surge KC. They're a teachers group committed to racial justice. Kansas Black Leadership Council, Equality Kansas in the back. And certainly we couldn't have done this without the help of the Help Forward Foundation. I should note that we have an esteemed panel of experts participating today. Welcome, panelists. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Our moderator, Erica Andrade, will introduce each of you individually, and most of you have brief panelist summaries on the plastic stands on your tables. Also, an agenda in the plastic stand on the tables. We'll proceed with an agenda and an overview of the constitutional amendment and questions from our moderators. And I would ask our panelists to, when you'd like to provide an answer, please pick up a mic, say your name if you can each time. You can choose to stand if you like. And there will be a 2-minute time limit on your responses so that others can respond if they choose. Keep in mind, this is not a debate or a forum. Every panelist does not have to answer every question. And at this point, I will introduce our moderator. We will take a set of topics with the panelists, answering those questions. Then we'll take Q&A on the note cards, and then we'll take another set of topics that the panelists will answer those questions, and then we'll do a Q&A, and so on. So our moderator today is, again, Erica Andrade. Erica is the president and CEO of El Centro, Inc., a Latino-led, Latino-serving nonprofit with nearly 5 decades of impact in Wyandotte and Johnson counties. Erica brings more than 24 years of dedicated service to the organization and an unwavering commitment to advancing equity, access, and empowerment for Latino communities. She has helped strengthen El Centro's role as a Spanish-first, community-driven institution that reduces barriers and expands access to essential resources and creates pathways to civic power. Erica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're actually going to start before the questions. We will start with a presentation. So I want to go ahead and present our first presenter now. Stacy Knoll is the Executive Director of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. In addition to her work with the KAAAC, she sits on the Johnson County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coalition and is President of the Board of Directors of the Kansas Black Leadership Council. She is the Vice Chair of the Kansas 250th Commission, which has been charged with overseeing Kansas' celebration of the 205th anniversary of America. Stacy was recently appointed as a citizen member of the Kansas 10th District Court Nomination Commission by Governor Laura Kelly. So now we'll welcome Stacy to come up and give us a presentation overview.
Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is Stacy Nell. I know it doesn't look like Nell, but it's Nell. And I do want to make one correction. I was not appointed to the 10th Judicial Nominating Circuit by Laura Kelly. It was by Commissioner Becky Fast in Johnson County. So one of these days. And I'm kind of sad that that says that I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. I'd rather be here with my Kansas Black Leadership Council hat on because it's Saturday and I want to be able to say what I want to say. If I'm going with my state hat, then people get, like, oh, are you representing the governor? No, I'm not representing the governor. This is me. Okay, so just a quick overview. Next slide. So right now, the hierarchy of Kansas courts, actually the hierarchy should be flipped upside down, is that the Supreme Court is on the top, and then the appellate court, and then the district courts. The district courts are ranging in sizes throughout the state, depending on population. Like, for example, the 10th Judicial Circuit is entirely Johnson County, whereas out west, as you can imagine, with the population dispersal, the judicial circuits get larger. Next slide. So district court judges right now they come to the bench in 2 ways. Some of them use elections, and some of them use the merit selection process. Johnson County uses the merit selection process, but Wyandotte County, as you can tell, uses the election process. So the districts have different ways of bringing people to the bench. Next. The Kansas Court of Appeals uses the nominating commission. That's that level of the courts in between that I think that they hear appeals, right? The appellate court. They use the nominating commission and the governor appoints, but then they have to go through Senate confirmation. All of this to say, every level of court has a variety of ways that judges come to the bench. It's kind of a patchwork situation. But right now, today, we're going to focus on how the Kansas Supreme Court judges come to the bench as opposed to the appellate court or even the district courts. So the Kansas Supreme Court selection process is the merit selection. Honestly, I think I'm going to defer at some point to Steve Leben to give the background of the triple play and how it all worked out. So I'll allow some more knowledgeable people on the panel to explain it in depth. Next slide. Okay. Now the retention elections. I want to take a pause here because one of the things that I have heard out in the field, I've knocked a lot of doors, is this idea that, well, we don't vote on the judges. We do vote on the judges. They are all up for retention after they're appointed, 1 year after. And then they're up every 6 years after that. So it's a misstatement. It's kind of it's like a fudging of the truth to say that we don't vote on the Kansas Supreme Court judges. We do have an opportunity to vote immediately 1 year after they're on the bench, and then every 6 years thereafter. That is a statewide election for retention, and right now it is not partisan. There's no indication after the person's name what their affiliation is. And because it is automatically on the ballot, these people do not have to campaign, they do not have to fundraise, they don't have to do the campaigning that a statewide affiliation, a statewide campaign tends to have to do. Next slide. The Supreme Court Nominating Commission, there are 9 commissioners. They are the ones who review the applications and vet applicants on that first initial wave before they get to the governor's office. And they do conduct public interviews, and then they select 3 finalists that then go to the governor for a final selection process. I tried to sneak it aside in here, because one of the things I've also heard is that this is like some sort of back smoky room where people are trading judges. Indeed, that is not the case. They have a YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube and watch the proceedings. The Kansas Judicial Branch has a YouTube channel. They have a YouTube channel. It's not hidden. It's live streamed. You can watch it. Okay, next slide. The explanatory statement on the ballot. So this is the wording that's going to show up on the ballot. And I'm going to read it because I want to show that it's confusing on purpose. This amendment gives the voters the right to elect the justices of the Kansas Supreme Court. The justices shall serve terms of 6 years with the elections of justice positions 1, 2, and 3 to occur in positions in 2028, positions 4 and 5 to occur in 2030, and positions 6 and 7 to occur in 2032, and every 6 years thereafter. Next slide. A vote for this proposition would give the Kansas citizens the right to elect Kansas Supreme Court justices as approved by law. Okay, we're going to come back to that as approved by law. Keep a pin in that. Justices shall hold offices for terms of 6 years. The Kansas Supreme Court Nominating Commission, whose members consist of the majority of lawyers, would be abolished. So, there's a couple things in there I might take issues with. The members, vote. Maybe go back one. And then that they will be elected as provided by law. We don't know what this election is going to look like yet. We don't know if it's going to be a primary. We don't know how they're going to whittle it down. We don't know how it's going to be handled. And so the fact that they, honestly, I don't think it's understood yet. I'm not sure the plan has been written yet, how it's going to be handled. But this, as provided by law, they'll get to it. And yes, now next slide. A vote against the proposition, which would continue the current system in which the Kansas Supreme Court Nominating Commission is there. So what I've tried to tell people that a vote yes means, yes, change the Constitution, and a vote no means, don't change the Constitution. So if you get through all this wording and you're like, oh, what does it mean? If you're talking to your friends and neighbors, do I vote yes, do I vote no? Yes means change what we have. No means don't change what we have. That's kind of the way I sort of sum it up if I'm talking to someone who's ringing the doorbell. Okay, next slide. So yes, the constitutional amendment, it is going to be on the August primary ballot. That is not by mistake. The primary primary elections tend to be low turnout elections. Because sometimes, for example, Democrats don't even have a primary, and Republicans may not have primaries in all races. So primary elections in general tend to be low turnout elections. People who are unaffiliated may tell themselves, I never have to vote in a primary, because the unaffiliated generally don't have a reason to show up. Same thing with people who are libertarian. So I think putting this election on a primary election was purposeful because the intent was to have few people vote on it. So yes, it would eliminate the Supreme Court Nominating Commission. It would change to statewide partisan elections, and the candidates would affiliate with political parties. I don't think, I had tried to put in an actual picture of what the ballot looks like, because the ballot, and I would suggest everyone to go to the Secretary of State's office or to your election office and print out what your ballot is going to look like, because it's going to look even more confusing than the wording that I just put on there. They print the entire bill that would change it. And at first I saw that, I thought that's a bad idea, but now I'm like, no, it's a good idea. Because I kept the slide, I can tell you where they cross out, right? So there's wording that's going in, but then there's also, you have to read through what's being crossed out, where it says that for the retention of judges, his name, as if women don't become judges, his name will be on the retention ballot without party designation. That part is taken out. That's how we know it's going to be a partisan election. And if you go down a paragraph later, there's a segment titled, The Political Activity of Judges, like the prohibition of political activity by judges. And it goes on to state which judges are not allowed to be politically active, and where it says the Supreme Court judges, that part is crossed out. So you have to kind of, you have to pay attention to what's on your ballot, and like take a second to read through what's being crossed out, because that's the devil's in the details. I like to tell people, devil's in the details. That's how we know it's going to become partisan. That's how we know it's going to be political, because they've taken a razor blade and taken out the parts that prohibit it being partisan and prohibit it being political. Okay, next slide. So yes, a yes vote means yes, change it. Get rid of the commission. Yeah, do away with it. No merit selection. Yes, we want statewide elections. Next slide. No means don't change it. Leave the Constitution the way it is. Okay, next slide. Why now? The Kansas Supreme Court, the Kansas Supreme Court is doing a good job because at one time or other, everyone's been mad at the Kansas Supreme Court. A couple years ago, I was mad at the Kansas Supreme Court submitted testimony on those ugly gerrymandered maps that make me mad every time I look at them. So they take me out. And the people have been Gannon versus State of Kansas. This one has to do with public school funding. And Hodes versus Nauser and Schmidt and all the guys, that has to do with women's reproductive rights. So the Kansas Supreme Court has weighed in on a couple of issues over the last, even just recent years, that have impacted our lives. And then there are people who are upset with that. I should have started this whole presentation by discussing for a hot second, how do questions get on the ballot in Kansas? We are not Missouri. In Missouri, if you had an idea and said, I want to get this question on the ballot, if you get enough signatures, you get your question on the ballot. That is not the way it works in Kansas. The only reason that this question is on the ballot in Kansas is because 2/3 of the Kansas legislature voted to get that question on the ballot. I am here representing a see-through organization, so I will not give my opinion on that fact. But the fact is that that is the only way that a question gets on the ballot is by a 2/3 majority vote, supermajority vote of the Kansas legislature. Currently, the fact is that the Kansas legislature is dominated by Republicans. Again, that's just a fact. Okay, next slide. Out-of-state money and its influence. I'm not going to talk about this either. I'm going to mention, this will come up when we talk about it, I'm sure. I am not sure, this is just me. I'm not sure how many out-of-state millionaires woke up today and said, how can we overturn the Kansas Supreme Court? But you know what? I can tell you who did. I won't say their name, can you guess? Okay, next slide. So finally, to wrap it all up, the merit selection process, it will result in having the best people come through the process. I hope to talk about this later. I am on the 10th Judicial Nominating Circuit. We have now gone through the process twice to get 2 judges' names up to the governor, and it is rigorous. I will tell one story here while I've got the microphone. There's a person who came through trying to be a judge, and on that person's record, in their background, they had some disciplinary action taken against them in 1998. And nothing, record's been clean since then. Given the number of people, the 8 other applicants, the fact that this one applicant had this ding on their thing, on their record, I think that sunk their nomination. Everyone respects this person, oh my gosh. But the fact that they had disciplinary action, again, I'm gonna say in 1998, when were you born?
97.
Okay. She was born in 1997. In 1998, this person had disciplinary action. They are not going to be a judge. I refer you to some of the people who are national who have had disciplinary action taken against them. And his merry band of followers who get elections. So the merit selection, to sum it all up, will produce the most qualified people, will produce people who need to be on the bench. There we go. That's it for me. I think I'm done. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. And now I'm going to do a small introduction of the rest of the panelists, and then we'll get started on the questions that we have. Again, like Connie said, if you have additional questions, you have little note cards on your tables. write them down, and then towards the end, I guess they'll bring them up to me, and we'll do that part too. Then I'm assuming this is gonna keep time for me. I'm just putting note things in. Speed it up. Okay, so further on my right, I have Steve Leben. Steve is a professor of law, associate dean for the faculty of UMKC Law School, where he is in his 6th year on the faculty. Before that, he served 13 of 27 years on the statewide Kansas Court of Appeals. He also trains judges nationally on how to make those who come through the court system feel fairly treated. In 2014, he received the National Center for State Courts William Rehnquist Award for Judicial Excellence. It's the highest award to a state judge in recognition of his work on procedural fairness. Welcome. Then we have, next to Stacy, we have Micah. Dr. Micah Kubic has served as the Executive Director of the ACLU for Kansas since January 2022. He serves also, his service includes roles as president of both the campaign that defeated the 2022 abortion ban in Kansas and the current campaign to protect the fairness and impartiality of Kansas Supreme Court. Prior to the ACLU, Micah had a variety of roles from local nonprofit organizations and policymakers. His first book, Freedom, Inc. and the Black Political Empowerment, was published in 2016 by the University of Missouri Press. Welcome. And then last but not least, we have Clay Wirestone. I am a fan, Clay. I read all your stuff. Clay Wirestone serves as the opinion editor for the Kansas Reflector. He recently won first place awards for column writing and editorial pages in the 2026 Kansas Press Association Awards of Excellence. Clay has written columns and edited reporting for newsrooms in Kansas, New Hampshire, Florida, and Pennsylvania. And he also does some fact-checking on politicians, conducted research, and appeared in a host of publications. Beyond the written work, he has also drawn cartoons, posted podcasts, and designed graphics, and has moderated debates. All right, so we have some prepared questions that we'll be going through. Again, I'm not going to call on individual people, so if you feel the impulse to answer, just please answer. And not everybody has to answer every question too. So we'll start with a little bit of history and background on the election and appointment system in Kansas. My understanding is that Kansas originally elected Supreme Court justices. How did we get to the appointment system that we use today? And I think, I'm not gonna say who should start. I think we were alluded to this by Stacey, so take it away, Steve.
Yeah, I pulled this up just so I could be sure I had it right. So the year I was born, 1956. Woo! What a great year. The governor of Kansas was at that time Fred Hall, and Fred Hall lost his primary election to be reelected as governor. And immediately after he lost the primary election, the Chief Justice, Bill Smith, announced he would resign. Governor Hall resigned. The lieutenant governor took over as governor and appointed Governor Hall as the next justice of the Supreme Court. And people thought that was a little bit odd that someone who had just been defeated would take over a spot on the Kansas Supreme Court. And that started the process in changing from partisan election, which is what we had to that time, to this nonpartisan system. And the furor over that was strong enough that it overcame the most potent possible objection you can imagine. The nonpartisan system of selecting judges is known as the Missouri Plan. And despite that name, Kansas adopted it in a constitutional amendment by a 60 to 40% margin in the 1958 election. So since 1958, we've had a provision in the Constitution that provided for the nonpartisan selection through the commission. Stacy said we always get the best and brightest through the process. And I will simply note that I twice made it on the list of 3 to be selected for the Kansas Supreme Court, and each time the governor chose someone who was even better and brighter, according to Stacy. But that's the system we've had since 1958. It was a part of a compromise in that people didn't want to necessarily change the way they selected their local judge. And you can imagine in less populated counties than Wyandotte or Johnson, most people know their judges. It's much easier to do. Here in Wyandotte County, you still can know judges. They can still come around and meet you. It's a little harder. Statewide, it's a lot harder. So that's where our system just kind of historically began. Were it not for Governor Hall, the idea of adopting something with the name Missouri, I think, would have been a hard sell. But that's the way it came about, and it was 60 to 40 at that time.
Thank you. A little bit of a follow-up question when we're talking about history and background, just in general, to level set a little bit. If this amendment would pass, what is the biggest thing in the court system that would change immediately? And then what wouldn't change at all?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Micah Kubic. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Before I say anything else, I have to give homage to Ms. Connie Brown Collins for putting this together today, and all of the so I'm always happy to do anything that she asks, and always happy to be here with my friend Erica as well, my sister from another mister. So I think in terms of what this would change, it would change from this merit-based system that Steve described to direct partisan elections. Which means, among other things, that rather than a system that currently selects folks based on temperament and experience and knowledge of the law and the Constitution, and still allows people to vote, so the best of both worlds, instead we would get a system that is really bought and paid for by billionaire political donors, especially those out of state. It would turn judges into politicians, and would allow the outcomes to be bought and paid for in advance by billionaire political donors. And that's not speculation, that's not apocalyptic. We know that that is what has happened and is happening in other states like Wisconsin, where they spent $100 million on one single state Supreme Court seat. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to the folks who are the advocates of the amendment. For example, the Attorney General of the state, Chris Kubic, who just last week said that if this amendment were to pass, it would, quote, "it changes everything." That's what he said. That's not me. He said it changes everything. And then he went on to mention abortion access, and school funding, and LGBT rights, and voting rights. So what would it change immediately? Everything. And what would it change for the long term? Everything for a long ding-dang time. Because this is so important. There are a whole bunch of candidates running. They're great, they're wonderful, love them all, whatever. This is so much more important than any single candidate race, no matter who you support, because those things, those candidates, they will make decisions for 2 and 4 years, their terms, right? This constitutional amendment will change everything, not just for 2026, but for 2036, and 46, and 56, and 66, and beyond. It is a multi-generational decision that we are making. I think Kansas is an imperfect but beautiful place. I think there are a lot of good things. I think there are a lot of things I would like to change. I work for the ACLU. My job is to criticize everything, every time, everybody, everywhere. So there's a lot I would change. I don't think, though, that we should change everything, including the good decisions that the state Supreme Court has made, or even the ones I disagree with. Because I also think that what this says is that we cannot act as adults. Adults, when they lose, including in court, don't throw the table over. They come back, they make a different argument, they do the work in communities, they don't burn the whole thing down. That's what this does, and that will persist for a long, long time if voters go along with it.
Speaking of, since you kind of, oh, go ahead.
So I would just make one point, and Stacy brought this up as well when she talked about how this amendment is on our ballots. I think there is incidentally, my name is Clay Wirestone, happy to be here. When folks who are backing this amendment say how important it is that members of the public have a say in electing Supreme Court justices, and how important it is to have a public voice on matters, I think it is important to also ask them why we then don't have a popular, why don't we have a system in Kansas, like Missouri and like many other states, where voters can choose proposals to put on the ballots themselves? And we don't have that system in Kansas. The only system we have in Kansas is one in which a supermajority of legislators decide what we can pick on the ballot. So if you look at that, and there's no active work in the legislature to create a popular initiative process for Kansas voters. No one is advocating that. And so if the folks in the legislature treasure the votes of Kansans as much as they claim to, why don't we have a popular initiative process in which Kansans can decide on Medicaid expansion, in which Kansans can decide, various abortion rights things, or, legalizing cannabis in one way or the other. We all know that there are large majorities of Kansans who support these things. And yet there is no move to do that. There is no move to put that process into law. And so you have to ask yourself why that is. Why is it that we supposedly value the votes of Kansans in this one set of votes and don't in another? And I think it is very much because the people who support this amendment believe that the elections can be bought. I think it's as simple as that.
Continuing to speak on benefits and challenges with both systems, some election proponents will say that appointment system is discriminatory and that it's an old voice network and that people of color never get the opportunity to be considered. How do we respond to that assumption?
So again, I don't think that we have to say that the system that we have is perfect. One of the criticisms that I have of our current system is that we have never had a non-white member of the Kansas State Supreme Court. I think that is a disgrace, and I think that it is incumbent upon communities to call on the nominating commission and the governor to do better in the future. We don't have to pretend like it's perfect. What we have here, though, is a choice between option A and option B. We do not have a choice between option A and just, let's keep on talking about it. Like if we pass it, it is not something that, we are open to additional reforms later. Instead, we are stuck with that system. And so there, I think we have to look nationwide at the situation. And there, we know that in general, overall, states that have the system that we do, that have nominating commissions, in general, are less diverse than the states that have elections. On average, about half as diverse as the states with elections. And yet, overall, the states with nominating commissions collectively have more non-white members of state Supreme Courts than do the ones with elections. That is to say, there are more non-white folks overall in the election states, and yet somehow nominating commission systems overall actually elevate more non-white folks to state Supreme Courts. That means that it really is something that is doable. And the other point that I think is important to make here is that in those election systems, one reason why, even though the non-white populations are much larger, folks aren't making it to state Supreme Courts, is because of the money. It's about billionaire political donors buying seats on the court, buying folks who will elevate the outcomes that they already want. And those billionaire political donors, they in general, in case you have not noticed, not real big fans of diversity. Billionaire political donors in general, not big fans of equity and inclusion. In general, not going to be elevating folks who articulate an agenda like that. And so they are not supporting, they are not vetting non-white candidates to get elected with their largesse, with their money to the courts. That, again, does not mean that we should not criticize the system that we have. It does not mean that we should not be calling on the governor and the nominating commission to do differently. What I do think it means, though, is that anyone who believes that an election system is going to be less discriminatory is not looking at the full picture of what's happening nationwide. And for that matter, it's looking at the history of the state of Kansas, where the last time an African American got elected statewide was in the 1880s. Anybody in here born then? Didn't think so.
I did want to follow up with the question of the Good Old Boys Network. Like I said, I'm on the 10th Judicial Circuit in Johnson County, so we sit the judges in Johnson County. There's 13 people on that commission, it's rather large, and I got appointed to this after this whole question came up, the whole amendment came up. So when we had our first set of meetings in that room, I was hyper aware of the Good Old Boys Network. Like, I walked in there thinking, oh. Now, of the 13 people, here's what I can tell you. Could I identify what I perceived to be a Good Old Boys Network? Yeah, there was 4 of them. Like, oh, there they are. I remember Judge back in there. I was like, oh, there it is. I could identify the Good Old Boys Network. Of the 13, there was 4 of them solid, and then actually 5 total. Then, of the 9 people who came up and did to give their presentations, and we all vetted them, could I identify their pick? Oh my gosh. This guy, literally in our conversation, I literally said, he's like a cartoon of the perfect idea of what a judge should be. Oh, he's so great. Oh my gosh, he's just so, they just fawned over this guy. So is there a Good Old Boys Network? Yes, there is. That is true. It is also true that I could identify who the Good Old Boys Network pick is. The third thing that is also true is that man was so qualified to be a judge that I have absolutely no heartburn over that person becoming a judge. Okay, out of the 9 people that we looked at that day, the Good Old Boys Network that exists, and the Good Old Boys pick that exists, still brought to the top a person who was qualified in ways that only 2 other people were. So what I'm saying about the merit selection process is that when people who are involved in the merit selection process, this is something that I get into the weeds on this because I'm going to say that every election is important. I'm on that nominating commission because of a county commissioner in Johnson County. The people who are on the nominating commission are because of who the governor is. Governor Kelly has been outspoken in her attempts to diversify her appointments. Governor Kelly has put a black woman on the Supreme Court nominating commission, and Ebony Clemens, she's out of Wichita. Governor Kelly has diversified her appointments to the nominating commission, which means to think that perhaps those people would also be looking for a diversified Supreme Court system. Now, every election has consequences. There's a governor's election coming up. Governor Kelly cannot run again. When we consider who the next governor is going to be, because that person is going to have, here's my biggest fear. Here's my honest to God biggest fear. So what's going to happen this year is what happened in 2022, which the no in 2022 won 60-40. And then 8 weeks later, we turned around and elected Governor Kelly, but then also elected Chris Kobach. How? I don't know. Every election has consequences. So if this no wins, and I think we have a very strong argument, if the no wins, and in November we turn around and elect someone who does not have it in their mindset to say, I'm going to appoint people to this nominating commission who are going to continue to uphold the merit selection process. If the no wins 60-40, which I think it might, and then we turn around in November and elect a governor who then has it in their mindset to undermine, which is what happened in 60-40, right? Oh yeah, we want women's reproductive freedom, and then the legislature went, nope, they just chipped away. The merit selection works when everyone is in it. If the governor does not agree in the merit selection, that governor will appoint people to undermine it. So if we vote no, please vote no. Oh, dang it, no. Sorry, scratch that. If, thank you. If you hear me talk and come to a conclusion that you feel is the one that you can follow, then do consider what happens in that next election. Okay. Sorry.
Quick time out. I said quick time out. We did have a representative come in that we want to acknowledge her presence. Representative Melissa Ortiz in the back. We just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. Okay, so leading into that, from that discussion, does the system tend to select those who are like-minded and who represents the political views or the governor and commission members' views? Does it, why or why not? Like, does that happen? Why or why not?
So I mentioned earlier that I've been through the system multiple times at multiple levels. I went through merit selection in Johnson County to become a district judge. I was there for 14 years. while I was there, I went through the system at the statewide level. I went through the system with the Court of Appeals, which was then the same as the Supreme Court when I did it. And I've been through the Supreme Court system several times. Never in any of those merit selection interview processes was there anything remotely political asked. Not a peep. And that included the background kind of communications I would have as I'm talking to people, to support me in that process, to say, yeah, I know Leben and he would be a really good judge or justice. Then I got some interviews with governors as well, both for the district bench where I did that. I interviewed twice, the second time I got appointed, and I interviewed 2 times with the governor for the state Supreme Court. In those situations, I only got asked one question that I think could be considered political. Governor Graves asked me, and I think this was a perfectly appropriate question. He asked, did I have any view about the death penalty that would prevent me from carrying out Kansas law? And that's a tough question because, yes, I do have an opinion about the death penalty, but the U.S. Supreme Court has decided it's constitutional under their constitution. At that time, our constitution in Kansas was being interpreted in lockstep on all the provisions that were similar, and I was able to tell Governor Graves, no, I do have a personal opinion on that, but it would not interfere with my ability to be a member of the Kansas Supreme Court. So in my own experience, that's the only time I got asked anything remotely political. When I interviewed with Joan Finney, it might not shock you that all she wanted to know was if I knew somebody she'd met at a town hall meeting in my hometown. And it was a very nice conversation, and I got appointed. But yeah, I just don't think that process really works that way. And when you think about it, if you've got a committee, it's hard for them to agree on politics among themselves. And so once those issues start coming to the fore, it just turns into a completely different thing, and I have not seen it do that.
I would just add one note, which is that I think you can look at the decisions that the state Supreme Court has handed down, and you will find that they have ruled against Republican governors, they have ruled against Democratic governors, they have ruled against the governors that appointed them, and they have ruled against the governors that came after them. If you were looking to just assess how the court would rule, looking at the governor who appointed them would be a really crummy way of doing it. And looking at what the position that the current governor seated at the time has would be a really crummy way of doing it. It just does not predict the outcomes. You can agree with the outcomes or disagree with them, but the justices who are there interpret the law and the Constitution according to their own interpretation and according to really faithfully applying that, not doing it based on the politics of the person who appointed them or the committees that sent them forward.
Supporters of the amendment will say that elections give power back to the people, while opponents say that the elections shift power to the wealthy interest groups. Who actually gains or loses power under this amendment, in your opinion?
Well, I'm an opinion editor, so I'll share some opinion. I think, we have courts for a specific reason. When you think about the way the separation of powers works, and not just in Kansas, but in the federal government, and it's a similar situation when you get to the states. You have the executive, the president or the governor who is popularly elected. You have the legislative bodies, the House and the Senate, who are also popularly elected. Obviously, those, as we've seen from the past 8 years of Governor Kelly and the legislature, they are often at odds. And then you have the judicial branch. And the judicial branch simply tells you, well, how do we interpret the laws? Are the laws constitutional? And really, in my opinion, the buck stops at the courts. The buck always stops at the courts. If they pass a law saying, if the legislature passes a law saying, I can't write any more columns, and the governor decides that's a good idea and signs it, the recourse, as a person, I can't go and try to elect a majority of legislators who like me, or a governor who likes me. My recourse is the courts. And that's true of all of us. And it doesn't just have to do with whether or not you can write columns. It's however you are leading your life. And if some law or something is applied to you in a way that is unjust or unfair, the recourse is the courts. And the courts, by their definition, have to be able to issue unpopular decisions. That's the whole point of having courts. Because if courts just decided what everybody liked, there's no reason to have a court. The reason you have a court is to say, this is an unpopular person or an unpopular or persecuted group, but they still have rights. You can't just target this person because you want to. You can't just target this person because a majority hates them at this particular hates them or has animus or whatever towards them at a particular time. To my mind, and of course that's not all the courts do. Courts handle contract disputes and a lot of other stuff that has nothing to do with that. But at the ground level, the courts are there, in my opinion, to serve as the last backstop for our constitutional rights. And I think if you look in Kansas and you look at what the Kansas Supreme Court has done, that has been what, in some very high-profile cases, they have done. They have served as a backstop for constitutional rights. Rights for, again, we've mentioned abortion rights, we've mentioned education funding, things like that. Basically allowing that to be subject to the whims of the popular vote. And again, not that the public shouldn't have some sort of say in that, as we do have in Kansas, and certainly as we do in the United States, because we can elect different people in the Senate who will approve or disapprove of Supreme Court justices, all of that. But insulating the courts in some way so they can make those decisions to protect the least among us. I think that's a real vital role. That's why we have the courts. That's what the courts are there to do. And I think that is something that is worthy to give them some degree of insulation. Because that's good for all of us. It's good for all of society. Sorry for rambling on.
I'm going to move on to a question from a note card. How does this constitutional change affect the checks and balances of our three sections of government, executive, legislative, and judicial?
I said.
You read their mind. Sorry, let me skip to. What will determine the competency and experience level and fitness for these positions if we move to elections? Or will there be any of those things set?
So the answer to that is there will be no process. Right now, there is a process. Folks have to fill out the applications. They go on everyone's favorite YouTube channel that Stacey told us about, to do their interview. There is a background check. There are questions about their interpretation of the law, their knowledge of the law. What happens instead is that they will essentially be vetted by billionaire political donors, and the person who will stand the best chance of winning will be the person who can get Elon Musk to return their phone call.
This is a question from a student from a past forum that was had, but it's a good question. If it passes, and if judges will not be elected, how do we prevent judges from becoming just another political subject to what the popular or, whims are? Is there anything at that point that we can do?
If this passes and the judgeships for the Kansas Supreme Court become a popular vote, then that is what it will be. So right now, on the Democratic side for the United States Senate seat, there are 11 people who are running. So that's what I mean by provided by law. We don't know. Will there be an 11-person primary? Will there be a primary? That's what we're saying. If it passes, that's what it will turn into. It will just turn into a primary vote. At this point, if the question is, well, what can we do at that point? Well, then make sure your friends are registered, and just like then it becomes get out the vote, make sure you're registered. Do you know when the election is? Do you da, da, da. Have you done your research? What can you find out about the applicants? I will tell you, a merit selection process, and you can probably back it up, they are looking at those people hard, right? Like, they're calling references, they're going through tax returns, like, it is not a I like you type situation. It is a very rigorous process.
It doesn't hurt if somebody likes you.
Yes.
But there's a lot more to it. I want to go back to the question, really behind that question is it going to be partisan? And we've danced around that a little bit, but I want to explain what the amendment actually says and talk about how that may play out. The amendment doesn't require partisan elections. It says they will be chosen as provided by law. They could provide a partisan election if they want. They could provide a nonpartisan election if they want. So which will they provide? In Kansas, the Kansas House of Representatives has been controlled by Democrats for 6 of the last 124 years. The last time was in 1992. The Kansas Senate was last controlled by Democrats in 1916. So the odds that the Kansas legislature will be Democratic are very small. So if you have a partisan group that has a chance to decide, shall we have partisan elections or not partisan elections, you can decide which way you think they will go. But we already know they voted 2/3, and it was exactly 2/3. They let a few people off the hook on having to vote for this. But they got exactly 2/3 to vote to change the system to election. So I think it is a certainty, but this is the way it happens. The legislature will get to make the decision that it will be a partisan election. We don't know if they'll have primaries. We don't know if they'll do districts. They might do districts because our geographical districts. Most of the members of the Kansas Supreme Court have come from the 3 metropolitan areas. Why is that? Because that's where most of the lawyers are. But you could do it in a number of ways. But the one thing that I think tells the story is whether it's going to be partisan. And I want to quote a couple of former Chief Justices from Texas where they have partisan elections. These are both Republicans and lifelong Republicans. Nathan Hecht, who was Chief Justice until he retired about a year ago, said judicial elections are the very worst way to select judges. If you have to have elections, he said nonpartisan. His predecessor as Chief Justice, Wallace Jefferson, said a justice system based on Democratic or Republican judging cannot be trusted. And they both presided over a Texas judicial system where it was partisan. They would have situations in the very fluid areas of Houston and Dallas where the whole courthouse would flip over in an election because there was a wave election and all people knew when they were voting for 40 or 50 judges in those metropolitan areas was, are they D or R? And so it will become, in my personal opinion, a much more partisan judiciary. And I don't think, for all the reasons we could talk about, and I'll talk about some more as we go on, of what's important in judges, I don't think that's a good thing.
And my bet is going to become partisan because when you read your ballot, they cross out the part that prohibits it from being partisan. Like, that's how you know it's going to be partisan. Because they could have left that in. They could have left it in that the retention ballot will be without party designations. Because that's what it says now. They took that.
Well, speaking of the amendment, I have another audience question. Is there any hope of getting the amendment clearly, or amendments, this one or in the future, clearly worded? How do we go about making that happen? Should we run them through AI for clarity, perhaps?
Let me answer that as a judge. So let's think about this for a moment. And one of the things we talked about with judges is judges sit and decide, is what the legislature, a co-equal branch of government, has done legal? So the legislature is always going to have a lot of leeway in the way they want to phrase a question. Then we have the explanation on the ballot. Again, there's lots of ways you could phrase that. But unless it is very wrong, not just mildly slanted, courts normally don't want to be involved in those decisions. And we elect our representatives to make decisions. They have the right to put constitutional amendments on the ballot. So I think it is generally something where you have to give some leeway. I will say on the Missouri side, there are cases every election cycle on how the explanation is placed on the ballot, and there's a lot of litigation on that. And it makes a very difficult situation between the court and the other branches of government. Certainly, you should do it as clearly as you can. If it's clearly misleading, you should change it. But it takes a little bit of slant. We can all present things from our viewpoint. And it's not surprising, I think, that there's a little bit in there. I look at this explanation, and I don't think it is inaccurate. I think it emphasizes certain points that they believe. It's kind of like a push poll in opinion polling. They emphasize the things that would be preferable from their side. Majority members of the nominating commission are lawyers. You get the right to elect. And so I think those are both true. We can talk about whether they should be or shouldn't be, or whether they could be changed, but I think they're true, literally.
I would just remind folks of what Stacy said at the beginning, right, which is who wrote the ballot language? Who wrote the explanatory statement, right? It was the legislature. It was the folks who want this to pass. And I agree that it is not technically inaccurate in any way, in the same way that in 2022, the ballot language that came before you was not technically inaccurate in any way. But did it surely try to confuse some people? Yeah. Did it surely muddy the waters? Yeah. And why might that be? What will be the purpose of putting forward something that is misleading, that muddies the water, that is confusing? I would submit to you that it is consistent with the entire sort of narrative around this, which is, in a lot of ways, is a trick, is trying to trick people into giving up power that they have and hand it over to someone else. I think the ballot language is tricky in that way. I think the concept is tricky in that way. And I think it is our rights and freedoms that pay the price. AI would also, as crummy as it is, probably do a lot better job.
I think along the same topic line, but a little bit more direct, this question is, and by the way, you guys are doing a great job with these questions. I'm gonna try to get through them all because they're all great. Who or what organization, or I would say interest group, submitted this up for legislation? Who is the they that want this amendment to pass?
Yet again, I'll take it. I'll jump on the grenade here. I might. So 1956, is this what we're saying for the case? Okay, so think about it this way. So 1958, so we have basically, we're nearly at 70 years for this process. The amendment is here now. So ask yourself, okay, so we've had 70 years of this. 70 years, and we're voting on it now. What has happened? Why is it that we're voting now? And you go back, you look at the Supreme Court, the Kansas Supreme Court case about abortion rights, finding that there is a right to abortion care in the Kansas Constitution. You look at what happened after that, which was there was a constitutional amendment set up to try to say that that right was not in the Constitution. That amendment failed, and now there is a new constitutional amendment that is on the ballot. Now it is possible, of course, that all of this is just a giant string of coincidences. And none of these things have anything to do with any of the other of these things. But I think when you look at what the Kansas Supreme Court has ruled, what the people of Kansas have decided, and how the fact that people who very much want to either ban or restrict or certainly have more government oversight of women's reproductive health, they still have power in the system. They're still very much interested in trying somehow to regain for themselves that power. And I mean, I think that's I mean, again, 70 years, why is it now? What has happened? What's the context? And it's also, again, it's not even a secret. Chris Kubic has said it. Senate President Ty Masterson, who's arguably the front runner for governor, has said it. It's not a great secret. And honestly, to me, I think this is one of the things, this does not have to be partisan. Talking about that this is a motivation of it should not be a partisan question. There are lots of people who oppose abortion in Kansas. And there are lots of people who support it. I believe that if people really want to debate what's motivating this amendment, absolutely fine. If people want to vote for that, it's fine. If they don't want to vote for that, that's fine. But let's not, fool ourselves into saying what this is about and who it would help. And anyone who works in the Kansas State House understand that there are interest groups and there are money for folks who oppose abortion. And there is a lot of money and there's a lot of campaign for support for folks who want to take those positions. Likewise, there are a lot of folks who have a long-running interest in spending less money in Kansas schools because that allows you to do things like pass larger tax cuts and, hand out those kinds of benefits. Again, if people want to vote for this, it's fine. I think it's just important that we be clear about what it is and what those motivations are.
I just want to answer more specifically who the they is. Chris Kubic, Ty Masterson, Americans for Prosperity. This time has asked me to explain Americans for Prosperity, which is a political, social organization that is largely funded by the Koch network of billionaires. You can agree with them, disagree with them, but I will name names. Chris Kubic, Ty Masterson, Americans for Prosperity.
Thank you. I have two questions that kind of ask a similar question, so I'm going to combine them. And it has to do with, this speaks to qualifications. So, are the judges always those with a full law degree? And further explaining that, if this passes, will the nominations be required to be lawyers, or will just anyone be able to be nominated? That's your question, because
I still think it will still get that people have to be 30 years old and that they will have to be practicing lawyers or at least licensed to practice law in Kansas for at least 10 years. So that's
The constitutional requirement is 30 years old and licensed to practice law in Kansas. Currently, there's a statute that requires that you practice for at least 10 years. The statute could be changed at any time by the legislature. So the ones we know for sure are 30 years old and licensed to practice law in Kansas. Currently, you also have to practice for 10 years before you can be appointed.
I can say, speaking of the merit selection process in the 10th Judicial Circuit, for example, we had 2 openings, 9 people who came up, and through a happenstance of the way people retired, we had the same 9 and an additional 6. So by the end, we had 15 people that we were going through. Some of the merit selection process questions were, what are the qualifications? And some people could be there's one person who's coming to mind right now, who literally, as she was talking through the interview process, and I'm glad someone else on the commission asked it, I was like, you're going to be bored as a judge. But she had never been a judge. So she was applying to be a judge, but she had never been a judge. She actually wasn't even a trial lawyer. Let me tell you, she was so bright, so smart, okay? Just ridiculously so smart. But she had never been a trial lawyer, and she had never been a judge. There are a couple people who've come through the process where we're like, okay, the feedback to them is, go be a magistrate, go apply, be a hearing officer, go get some judgeship experience to become a judge, because there were a lot of people who had been magistrate judges, and that's the competition in a merit selection process, is you have people who have been judges, who have had that experience, against people who are very bright but who haven't had that experience. And so if you're asking someone to become a Supreme Court judge, right, at that point, I would like the people who are getting to the final round of being a Kansas Supreme Court judge to be people who have background in really being a judge, to know what it means to be a judge, to practice at the district court level, to know what it means to be in situations where they have to put their nonpartisanship to the test. right? Where they've tried, where you've had to deal with, okay, I may have an opinion about this, but I know I'm here to apply the law, I know I'm here to be fair, I know I'm here to do the right thing. With the merit selection process, I do believe that those are the people who are making it to that point. Whereas if it goes to an open, just anybody who can apply, I'm not convinced that the person who potentially might win that election would win the election and then sit on that seat going, I'm here to fairly apply the Constitution, not my own opinions. Where with the merit selection process, I do have faith that the people who are making it through, currently, the way the merit selection process is run, given the way it is set up right now, I do believe that it is producing people who are coming to the bench saying, I'm going to be fair, I'm going to be impartial, I'm here to uphold the Constitution, not what anyone yelling in my ear might say, right? Just like he mentioned, yes, I have an opinion, but I'm not here to talk about my opinion. I'm here to faithfully withhold the Kansas Constitution, and I believe that's what the merit process will produce.
Thank you. How often do we see that a constitutional amendment will come in with the wording that leaves the exact process to be determined? Is that a very common thing for us to see here? And would you speculate as to why that is?
It is actually a common thing. Constitutions are not where you put the details of all government. So the broad picture is set out in the Constitution. In this case, had they placed the details in there, that would then be frozen for as long as it takes to have the need, in some people's opinion, for another constitutional amendment. So you can certainly argue that it makes sense not to have all the details there. But I think in this case, you can also predict where it would go. It's not necessarily unusual not to put all the details into a constitutional provision, but when you leave all of the discretion in how to structure the elections to a legislature that has supermajorities of one party, you would expect that they would design the system to benefit that party. Just as is done right now in gerrymandering, which has been allowed at both the state and federal level. Parties operate usually to further their interests. And so I don't think it's unusual for a constitutional amendment not to be overly precise, but the discretion is being given to a group that has a supermajority for one party.
Okay. If judges have to campaign to be Supreme Court judges, how will this affect the backlog, or will it affect the backlog of cases that need to be heard in the lower courts?
I don't think it would have a big impact because the number of people running for a Supreme Court position, we have 2 positions in any given year, and you're not going to have that many members of the district bench running. So if a district judge is running, that's
say they have to be running the district bench.
right, but it's only going to disrupt the court handling cases if it's a judge running. There's no disruption to the court if you run for the Supreme Court. Get your night law degree quickly and seek a position.
Don't tempt me.
Right. But if somebody who's not a judge runs, it won't affect the court at all, court handling. I just don't think, we've got around, I think 160, 170 district judges in Kansas at the trial court level, 14 on the intermediate appellate court. I don't think that's a big factor in all the things we could think about in this particular amendment in how you would want to analyze it.
I would also just point out, the Kansas legislature has the ability to fund the court system however it decides, however it chooses. I think you can look at this past legislative session when they gave a whole 1% raise to many people in the executive branch, and they did not fund any sort of raise for any employees in the judicial branch. I think it's very clear that if there are questions about like case backlogs or resources for courts, this is actually something that is very much within the legislature's ability to fill or to fix. The fact that it hasn't suggests something about how it looks at the justice system, I think.
I'm gonna move on to a question from a student again. This had to do with trust and civic engagement. So, I think we can all agree that right now, trust is a big problem when we talk about elections and our elected officials in general. The majority of youth in this country don't trust the government right now. Would electing judges build more or less trust, and why? Student question.
So I think it's a great question and speaks directly to why this is such a problem. I don't think that judges should be politicians, and although it might not affect the backlog, I do think that if a justice is spending all day dialing for dollars, trying to get folks to invest in their campaign, the notion that that is not going to somehow impact the decision is crazy pants. No one should go into court having to wonder whether the other side has paid millions of dollars to the justice who's weighing in on their case. The Constitution should not be decided based on who put a bigger stack of dollar bills on the table. And that is absolutely what will happen. That is what we have seen in other states, and that is an erosion of public trust. There is no way that folks could have the same level of confidence in the system. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to think that the current system is great. It doesn't mean that you have to think that the current system is without flaw. But the idea that you could inject $100 million, as they did in Wisconsin, to every single Supreme Court race and not have that somehow impact the outcomes and the way people perceive it, I think is just ridiculous. I just want to go back to one other thing for a moment, though, too, which is the idea that we would do that is all premised on this, like, right to vote. They even call it the right to vote amendment. And I just want us all to pause for one moment and reflect on the notion that Chris Kubic positions himself as a champion of voting rights. He ain't thought about voting rights one other day in his life. He's going to forget about it tomorrow. He has dedicated his entire career to taking away voting rights and giving power to the billionaires instead. So if you think that this is about the right to vote, look at who's talking and see whether he ever found another vote that he liked in his life.
Okay, I'm gonna take this from a slightly different angle. So we're talking about trust in government, and I agree with the questioner, but it's not just you. Nobody in America trusts government right now. Nobody trusts institutions right now. And it's been when I grew up, even though it was the era of Watergate, for heaven's sakes, 70% of people thought the federal government in Washington would do the right thing most of the time. This is when Nixon was president. And 70% of the United States population thought the government of Washington would do the right thing most of the time. We're in like 15% now. I mean, it's just, so we've got to think about this. But what I want to talk about is, what are we looking for in judges? So for me, we want judges who will respect the rule of law. Judges administer a whole branch of government. So we want people who can do that, and they need to be able to work together. They have to have the qualities that would let them carefully consider cases before them, and they have to be able to, as Clay pointed out, protect the rights of all of us, including when we're momentarily unpopular or it goes against someone else. We want them to be very clear-headed at those times. I've looked into a lot about what makes a good judge, and the thing I've finally come to is a concept called intellectual humility. And social psychologists recently, in the last 15 years, have come up with a construct actually measured. And it comes down to the bottom line to, are you willing to re-examine your conclusions? Maybe I could be wrong. If I am wrong in this case, what might be the reason? What's the best argument of the side I'm going against? Should I reconsider that? People with intellectual humility are less prone to my side bias. They're more likely to be lifelong learners, which is incredibly important for judges, because once they get on the bench, they stay there for a really long time most of the time. I was on for 27 years. We hope I don't stop learning just because I'm a judge, and I don't stop thinking either. So we've got all those things. Think about which way you select your judge. If you're having a partisan election, you're selecting someone who can sloganize and raise money. If you're selecting in a merit selection system, you can actually think about, does this person have any basic humility? Are they the kind of person who would work well with others? Do they have a really good legal mind? Those are things that would be very hard for you to judge in a partisan election, even if someone with those qualities could get the money to run. So from my perspective, I'm not disagreeing with Micah's perspective, but from my perspective, there's this completely nonpartisan consideration of what makes good judges and what's the judiciary about. And if they can't perform those functions really well, they won't be respected. So the selection of individual judges and justices, I think, needs to be very carefully thought out. There is no perfect system. Merit selection is not perfect. Our Kansas system could be tweaked. They are not interested in tweaking, and I think Clay has pointed out the reason for that. I would just add one note to Clay's on why we're here now after 70 years. It's not school finance. School finance was also litigated in the courts in Kansas in the 1970s. I attended a hearing in my local court when I was a news reporter for the El Dorado radio station. And the judge found the State School Finance Act unconstitutional. And I was like, whoa, I've got this great story. This is just phenomenal. What a great day for me. And the state Supreme Court, after the legislature changed it, declared the case moot because they didn't want to get into it back then. Gannon, though, was in 2010, the original decision, and we're now in 2026. So the thing that really has changed is the one Clay pointed to, and I don't think it makes sense from a public trust standpoint to change our whole system. One more thing, and I apologize, I've gone way past my time, but this one's important, which is rule of law considerations. So in states that politically elect their judges or have a political valence on it, two situations. Iowa had a state Supreme Court that decided that they had a state right to abortion in 2015. 2022, they got enough of those justices removed at the ballot place that the court flipped and went the opposite way. North Carolina in 2022 said political gerrymandering violated the state constitution. The courts could order a remedy. At the 2022 election, they threw out 2 Democratic justices. January 2023, when the new justices came in, they reconsidered the case and found that gerrymandering did not violate the Constitution in North Carolina. From a public perception of respect of the courts, decisions that flip-flop in that way from partisan elections can do nothing positive.
No, you said it. You said it.
Okay. Since the public is able to vote on whether or not to retain judges, interestingly enough, how we were just talking about how we want to vote. Anyways, I just find that a little ironic that we can actually retain judges with our vote. What is the best way to educate ourselves about how our judges are doing when they're up for these re-elections? That is a great question I would like to know too, because we all see it and we're like, oh, I don't know.
Well, I mean, so this is the flip side of the trust question, right? And one of the reasons why there used to be a lot of trust was that people were also more informed and engaged in their communities and in what was going on in the state. So the answer is, in terms of, knowing what happens, I work for Kansas Reflector. We actually cover almost all the big state Supreme Court decisions. Now, not every single one. I mean, they do a lot, but when big things come up, we write about those decisions. We tend to talk about what the split was, how the judges decided, and so I think there's this issue sometimes when we talk about government and all that we want, and we do want people to be able to exercise their right to vote, and we want people to be able to weigh in on issues that are important to them. But that comes with a certain degree of responsibility, you know? And I'm not saying that the state Supreme Court or that the state news media couldn't do a better job of talking about what the Supreme Court does. They certainly could. But you know, it is possible for everyone in this room who has an internet connection to go to the Kansas Supreme Court's website and actually read every one of their decisions. And actually read all of the dissents and all of the majority opinions if you want. Actually, most judicial writing at that level, I mean, it's not the easiest thing in the world to read, but it's not that difficult either. You know, 50 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to do that. You would have had to drive up to Topeka. You would have had to go, you know, probably go to the court, ask for, you know, like, I don't know, some sort of mimeograph of the decision. We have so much access to this kind of information if we wanted. And again, I understand that's kind of an eat your broccoli kind of answer to it, and there are other ways to do it, but the information is out there if folks really want it.
There is a solution to that problem, and several states have this. They have judicial evaluation performance commissions that are publicly established and have citizens and lawyers who review the courts and give you a report on the performance of judges, including surveys of both citizens for a trial bench and lawyers, and actual observation of judges on the bench to determine, are they flippant, are they open to actually listening, those kinds of things. Kansas had that for a very brief time. It was on a statewide commission that recommended that we have judicial evaluation commissions. The Kansas Judicial Council recommended it, the Kansas legislature adopted it, and they funded it for 2 years, and then decided, if we want to get rid of merit selection, is it really good to have all of this information out there, and they quit funding it. And shortly after that, they changed the method of selection for the Kansas Court of Appeals, which is purely statutory and they could do without a constitutional amendment. But there is a mechanism. It is something that works. It's used in many other states. Utah and Colorado both have, and Alaska, all three have very good functioning judicial performance evaluation commissions. In Kansas, the only thing we have is Bar Association surveys. They are published in most places before an election to let you know, at least in the merit selection places, what the bar thinks of the candidate, but that's a limited piece of information.
I don't disagree with anything that either Clay or Steve said, and I think the more information is better, and folks should seek it out, and we should have more opportunities. But I want to say just one thing about the big picture there, which is before this amendment came along, how many people in this room spend even 10 minutes a day thinking about the state Supreme Court? People raise your hands in this room. Right. Very, 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 very few people. And they're right. And Representative Orpez back there, so we got two of you in a room this big, right? And I say that just because part of that is because they were quietly doing the job that we have given them to do. If they had been blowing things up, if they had been treating people unfairly, if they had been cutting away at our rights and freedoms on a daily basis, I guarantee you we would know more about it. That's the same way that in the examples that Steve gave in Iowa and North Carolina, like the courts there became huge flashpoints where people were constantly talking about them. The names were known. That was because of the level of intensity and anger, because people were not doing a fair and impartial job, but rather the courts were politicized. So yes, I want us to have more information. I want us to be able to assess the retention elections fairly, all that sort of stuff. But let's also note that the situation we have is directly based on the fact that the folks who are there are doing the job that we have asked them to do in the way that they're supposed to do it.
This might be a quick answer to this question, but somebody would like to know. Is there a place to get summaries and interpretations of the court's decisions where it's like in one place, where we just like, this is where you should go to get that?
No, I mean, I would just say I believe the state Supreme Court maintains its own website and has a list of its opinions there. If you ever want to go into it, like big opinions, they did have what's called a syllabus right at the beginning that gives you kind of a summary of what the ultimate, case is about and what the decision was.
do they also, is there anywhere where you can find the interpretations of the court's decisions?
I mean, that's where you'd really have to start looking into news media coverage, I think.
All right, thank you very much. So this is a kind of a question related to something that just happened. So might be related, your opinion would be great on this matter. So what could replace the Federal Election Assistance Commission that was just disbanded by the president yesterday, and how could or will this affect our elections?
Take it away.
ACLU.
Well, for those of you just tuning in, there has been a sustained, deeply dishonest, deeply disingenuous campaign to attack the right to vote that has been going on for the last 20-some-odd years. It's really a very old fight that goes back to the start of the country, but really right now we have been in this pitched battle around voting rights for the last 20 years. And I think that has culminated of late with the U.S. Supreme Court handing down a series of decisions that attempt to undo the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that are some of the worst, most racist, most awful decisions that we have ever seen. There's one in particular that came down a few weeks ago called Calais, I want y'all to remember that, Calais. Because I believe that Calais will go down in the history books along with Plessy versus Ferguson as one of the worst, most racist, most rancid decisions in the not always glorious history of the U.S. Supreme Court. That particular decision said that racist gerrymandering is just fine, denying black voting power in particular is just fine, so long as you at least pretend that it's about partisanship. And I don't know why it's okay to discriminate on the basis of party either, but that's what the U.S. Supreme Court said. That is relevant to this because that whole sentiment that voting is a privilege rather than a right is what infects these silly executive orders that the president hands down every other day. Every time he gets a brainstorm, he sends out an executive order. An executive order is just a memo, by the way. It's just a memo. Yeah, it's important, it matters, but it can't overwrite the law and it can't overwrite the Constitution. It is just a funky little memo. But he hands these out on voting rights in particular. Some of them have been blocked, and now he's got rid of the Election Assistance Commission, whose job was basically to provide some funding and some technical assistance to election administrators around the country. The good news here in Kansas is that our election administrators are pretty good as it is. There are some I wish would do differently, but we have fair, honest, well-run, well-administered elections in Kansas. So I'm not worried so much about the EAC. What I am worried about, though, is that if the federal courts are not going to protect voting rights, and they are not, state-level courts are that much more important. Because one of the things that has been implicit but not said out loud in our discussion here today is that the U.S. Constitution and the state Constitution do different things. The U.S. Constitution contains rights, and the state Constitution can grant additional rights above and beyond what the federal Constitution does for people who live in the state. That's why we have a state-level right to abortion access that does not exist at the federal level. So, all of that means that state courts are that much more important in protecting voting rights. More important now than ever before. Because if Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito are going to say that voting is a privilege rather than a right, are going to say that voting is not a right, but a privilege, then it is that much more important that the state Supreme Court do the same. Now, our state Supreme Court, one of the places I have disagreed with them is on the gerrymandering case that Connie Brown Collins alluded to before. I think they were wrong about it then. There are cases, though, that are winding their way through the courts back up to the state Supreme Court again to revisit this issue. There are new justices revisiting this issue. I don't know how they're going to rule. Maybe they will rule the way I like. Hope so. Maybe not. But you know what I know for sure? If the same thing went to the U.S. Supreme Court, we would be in a bad place. The fact that I know that in advance is a problem. The fact that I don't know what the state Supreme Court is going to do because they are fair and impartial is in fact the reason for hope and the thing that we have to protect. We have to protect voting rights, and the way to do it right now, given what those fellas and those folks in Washington are doing, is at the state level. So the voting rights are on the ballot on August 4th in this thing. In the same way that abortion access and school funding are on the ballot, voting rights are on the ballot on August 4th.
I would say, follow up, it kind of even wraps up with this notion of, do we have trust in systems? Let me speak for just myself, I don't know what you think, when you think the United States Supreme Court. I know when I think of the United States Supreme Court, I feel as though it has become political. I don't think it should have been political, but I think we are in a situation now where it is clear that the United States Supreme Court is political. When I think of the United States Supreme Court, I would think of it as being political. When I think of the Kansas Supreme Court, I don't. And if this becomes a political process to get people to the Kansas Supreme Court, the Kansas Supreme Court will become political. I don't know what you may or may think about having a United States Supreme Court that is so obviously political, because they clearly are. I don't want that for Kansas. And if it becomes an election, that is what's going to happen.
I'm down to my last couple questions, but before that, quick announcement. If anybody wants a little bit more sweets, there are some on the table. Almost birthday, we need some sweets. So last couple questions, last two questions. First, I think I'll end with that one. So what can we, as members, this is another no card question. What can we as members of the community do to either help the amendment pass or ensure that it fails?
I think everyone here has a voice, and you have an audience. There are people who listen to you and who trust your thoughts about various things. Even if they may not necessarily agree with you, that they will listen to you and say, oh, well, gosh, let me at least pay attention to that. So you find your audience of people and talk to them. Right? Like, that's honestly the easiest way to do it. Is that if everyone in here talked to 5 people about the things that you heard today, then that would be 5 additional people times, all these people in here who would then know. And if you talk to them to the point where they're like, gosh, dang, wow, we didn't even pay attention to this, they may go talk to 5 people. So that's one small thing that you can do. Some people get overwhelmed. What are we going to do? Well, just talk to your friends, talk to your neighbor, talk to your mom, your dad, your son, your kid, whatever. The next thing would be, people say, what could I do? I always ask them, how much time do you have? So if you only have an hour, just talk to 5 of those friends. If you only have an hour, read a couple of Clay's articles, and then talk to your friends. Wow, I read this in the Kansas Reflector. That's just an hour, but you sharing what you know will help people. If you have, let's say I've got 20 hours to give. Okay, well then you might sign up for a text bank or for a phone bank, or you might volunteer with any various organizations that are around the perimeter here to get involved with how to get the word out. I'm sure if you said, I have 20 hours to give between now and August 4th, the League of Women Voters people, I'm sure could find something for you to do. Right? So, I think I always ask how much time you have to give. Now, I have a lot of time and I'm committed to the effort. So, I am a precinct captain for my county party, which means they give me lists of people whose job it is for me to go knock their door. And I know for a lot of people that's scary to go knock their door. But I every night, the past week, I take about 30 doors and I go and I knock the door and I talk to the people. So this is me talking to strangers, which might be a little bigger lift for you out there. That's why I say start with your friends. Read one of Clay's articles, start with your friends, right? Sign up for the ACLU newsletter, whatever, do you have a newsletter? Sign up for a newsletter, read the newsletter, talk to 2 friends at church. Hey, I read this, did you know about this? You have 20 hours, League of Women Voters, I'm sure will put you to work. If you've got 20 hours every week, go volunteer with someone someone will put you to work. They will find something for you to do. So I think, this idea, what can you do? There is something that we can all do. And don't feel overwhelmed by, oh, she knocks 30 doors a day. Talk to a couple friends, right? It's talk to your friends.
I will just put it this way. The voters of Kansas have made a lot of decisions over the years, some of which I personally don't care for very much. I don't love that Chris Kubic is our Attorney General, for instance. However, the Republican Party did not say that Ben Affleck was actually running for Attorney General. And then, after people voted for Ben Affleck, say, surprise, it's Chris Kubic. They actually put Chris Kubic on the ballot, and it was very easy to see who Chris Kubic was and what he had done. So while I maybe don't love that he's Attorney General, I can also accept that, well, people made a decision that was based on knowing who this was and what this case was. To me, if the people of Kansas want to adopt this amendment and do so, fine. But I think we should all be very clear about what the amendment actually will mean and why it is why people decided, why the legislature decided to put it up for a vote. Like, we should be absolutely clear about what it would do, what it would mean, and what the motivations behind it were. Because otherwise, it's, claiming that you're running Ben Affleck and actually getting Chris Kobach. I mean, whatever the case, we should be absolutely crystal clear about what the stakes are and what it means.
Bringing it here locally for my almost last question, maybe last question, we'll see how long it takes. I know, this might be it. Why should Wyandotte and Johnson County voters care about this issue? How will it directly impact us?
I think this is just about the most important thing that we have ever faced in this state. Because I really do believe that every single issue that we care about is going to find its way to the state Supreme Court. We already know that abortion rights are there. We already know that school funding will make its way back again. School districts already are getting ready to sue the state government over the way that the funding formula is discriminatory. So school funding is going back. Immigrants' rights is going to go to the state Supreme Court as we have local law enforcement agencies violating people's rights under the state constitution in addition to the federal constitution. Healthcare is going to go to the state Supreme Court. All of the issues that we care about are going to the state Supreme Court. So if there is anything that you care about, no matter what your one issue is that is most important to you, I guarantee you it is making its way to the state Supreme Court over the next few years. And I don't know about you, maybe you feel differently, but I am tired of billionaires trying to buy every ding-dang thing in America. Every last one. I'm tired of them trying to buy outcomes. I don't know about you, maybe you feel differently, but I don't think my interests and the interests of Johnson County and Wyandotte County are the same as out-of-state billionaire political donors. I think we want different things. And so, they want to buy the outcomes ahead of time, and they have been clear what those outcomes are. Again, a ban on abortion, a ban on public school funding, collaboration with ICE, getting rid of voting rights, getting rid of LGBT rights that are also up at the state Supreme Court here. That is what is on the ballot. No matter what it is that is affecting you in your everyday life, that is at stake here because the state Supreme Court weighs in on it. And so the choice is really whether you think that your interests align with the extremist architects of the amendment and the billionaire buddies or not. That is what is at stake. That is why it matters for you. It's not about the right to vote, because if it were about this supreme power that the folks should have, I've not heard any of the folks who are for the amendment saying that they should take away Donald Trump's right to appoint Supreme Court justices and go to elections instead. Have you? So we know that that's not what it's about. What it is about is that agenda, and again, whether your interests align with the billionaire donors or not. Mine don't, maybe yours do.
I want to thank the panelists for their participation and their wonderful thoughts today. I want to open it up to final thoughts, final brief thoughts from each one of you to close us out for today.
I have to figure out how to say this in order to maintain my C3 status. But I think it's important that no matter what we vote on August 4th, we need to back that up with a similar vote in November that will support the vote in August 4th. The reason, I'm going to restate, the only reason that this question is on the ballot is because the Kansas Republican supermajority put this question on the ballot. Depending on how we vote in August, that should determine who goes back to the Kansas House in November. So please, I'm not sure I can necessarily draw that line for you, but please draw that line for your friends.
I want to do a couple things about the way judges operate. So first, I've talked to you about what are we looking for in the qualities of a judge. And I think we want careful listeners, people who can think carefully, people who have this intellectual humility, and people who can work well with others, because the Kansas Supreme Court has 7 members who have to work together both to administer the state justice system and to decide cases. And then the other thing we want to think about is, so on that one, the question is, how does the selection system play out in selecting the judges? Well, on the selection side, to me, in the merit selection system, you can factor all of those things that I think are important in, and on the political side, they really are not the play. The play is money and connections. The second thing, though, and Micah got this up, the question I answered earlier was about backlog, and Micah turned that into a very impressive presentation about what judges would do in fundraising. But I want to go back to that, though, in terms of what's the job of a Supreme Court justice in their daily work. So I was an appellate judge on the court right below them for 13 years. We sit in panels of 3 instead of 7, but we have to work together to make decisions. I can't make any decision on my own, I need another vote. I also got to sit with the Kansas Supreme Court multiple times, and I got to sit with them for their entire docket in December 2019, right before I left the bench in 2020. And so I conferenced with them in their confidential conference on all the cases for an entire docket. I also met with judges and justices in chambers to discuss some of their cases as we were working on the opinions. They spend a lot of time crafting opinions, making sure they get it right, because they're the final word on lots of law in the state of Kansas, and very small things in their opinion can make a difference. Now think about, we instead take away 4 hours a day to be calling to raise money, or 3 hours a day. What are they focused on? They're focused on what do the people who are going to pay me to get reelected think is really important. And that's not the job they have today at all. The job they have today, in my own estimation, including having sat with them behind closed doors, is pretty much nonpartisan. Do views matter? Yes, values matter. We have differences of opinion on a number of things. But we also were able to work together, even though we may have very different viewpoints on lots of things. We can work collegially. I think that would be a different system.
I've said really almost everything I want to say. Just one last comment. We are at a library. If you go to the reference section over there and pull a thesaurus off the shelf, you will look up the word judge. You will not find politician as a synonym. There's a reason.
And I would just say this, 4 years ago in Kansas, when the value of the vote amendment was on the ballot, on the same early kind of Tuesday, August primary election day, people in Kansas understood what the stakes were. They understood that even though the amendment had a somewhat confusing description, they understood that even though its advocates said certain things, they understood that what they were voting on was whether or not the legislature would be able to pass an abortion ban in the state of Kansas. We are 4 years later now, and this is a bill, this is an amendment that ultimately, and it would take a while, it would not be immediate, it would take a little bit, but it is an amendment that would ultimately allow for the exact same thing to happen. That's right. Exact same thing. And so especially for young people who 4 years ago thought that it was very important for them to get out and make their voices heard on that amendment, it is no less important now. That's what I have.
Thank you very much. So, Steve, Stacey, I'm going to say thank you for your And then I'll have Connie come back and do her acknowledgement, her closing.
Thank you so much, Erica. You were wonderful. Thank you. thank everyone again for coming, especially our co-hosts, our moderator, our partners and sponsors, our one elected official, is she still there? And everyone who has joined us today. We have some very committed volunteers also who help us with these events. I want to thank you all. Thank you, thank you. We couldn't do these without our dedicated volunteers. Can we have a round of applause for them? And we also could not do this without you, our valued and passionate community. We know, again, that your Saturdays are often packed. We really appreciate you taking the time out today. If you would like to join our advocacy work and receive email updates from us, we would love to have you. You can sign up at our registration table. You can give me a note with your email, or you can go to our website, www.voterrightsnetwork.org, and sign up, or any of the websites of our partners that are, and our hosts that are with us today. I'll be glad to be in touch if you sign up with our meetings, our speakers, our event notices, and other important legislative updates and information. We mainly update information from our state legislature, what's going on in Topeka that impacts us here in Wyandotte and Johnson counties. Finally, we will host our Dance the Vote booth at Third Friday Art Walk here in Wyandotte next Friday, July 17th. So stop by. We will have a video photo booth, a couple of DJs throwing out some really jamming music, and we will be line dancing. So we also will have a line dance instructor, if you don't know, who can teach you. And it's fun. It's fun. Come on out. So we hope to see you there. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Take good care and be safe getting home. Thank you.